There's something strange about small towns tucked away in the woods. They hold secrets, concealed by shadows that grow thicker as the sun sinks beneath the horizon. Nestled deep within the vast expanse of pinewood forest was a place called Dark Hollow, a town that was erased from maps long ago, yet never truly abandoned. The world might have forgotten it, but Dark Hollow never forgot those who ventured too close. It was a late autumn evening when Rachel and her friends, Jenna, Eric, and Tom, found themselves driving down a narrow dirt road in search of a weekend getaway. They had booked a remote cabin near Pinewood Forest for some hiking and relaxation, hoping to escape the pressures of their mundane jobs. Little did they know, they were headed for something far more sinister. Rachel had always been the sensible one, the planner of the group. She sat in the passenger seat, staring at the GPS, which was beginning to glitch out. "It says we're close, but the signal keeps cutting," she muttered, glancing at Jenna, who was driving. "Maybe we took a wrong turn back there," Jenna replied, her eyes scanning the road ahead, which was growing darker by the minute. The trees loomed on either side like skeletal giants, their branches swaying ominously in the wind. Tom, in the back seat, yawned. "We should have just stayed at a hotel. I don't know why we had to pick a cabin in the middle of nowhere." "Because we wanted an adventure," Eric retorted, always the optimist. "And besides, I hear this forest has some crazy local legends. Supposedly haunted or something. It'll be fun." "Fun?" Rachel scoffed. "That's the last thing I want, getting scared out here in the dark with no cell service." Jenna suddenly slowed the car to a stop. "Look at this," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. Ahead of them, the road forked into two. The left path was blocked by an old rusted gate, with a sign hanging askew that read, "Dark Hollow, Private Property." The right path, according to the GPS, led to their cabin. "That's weird," Eric said, leaning forward. "Isn't Dark Hollow that ghost town? I heard about it on some urban legend forum. Apparently, the whole town disappeared overnight or something crazy like that." "I don't care what it is," Jenna said, pulling the car to the right. "We're not going anywhere near it. Let's just get to the cabin." As they drove away, Rachel couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that lingered as they passed the gate. There was something about the name, Dark Hollow, that gnawed at her thoughts, though she couldn't remember why. The cabin was quaint but cozy. A fire crackled in the hearth as the group settled in for the evening, sipping wine and chatting about their plans for the weekend. Yet, despite the warmth and laughter, Rachel couldn't rid herself of the growing unease. The wind outside had picked up, howling through the trees like a mournful cry. Every once in a while, she would catch herself glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching them. "You're really quiet tonight," Jenna remarked, nudging Rachel. "Everything okay?" Rachel forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired from the drive, I guess." But her mind kept drifting back to the rusted gate, to the name on the sign. Dark Hollow. Later that night, after everyone had retired to their rooms, Rachel found herself wide awake. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. Something about Dark Hollow was calling to her, like a whisper just beyond her reach. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Slipping out of bed, she tiptoed down the stairs, careful not to wake anyone. She needed fresh air, to clear her head. Maybe a quick walk around the cabin would help her shake this unnerving feeling. Stepping outside, she was greeted by the chill of the autumn night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the landscape. The wind had died down, leaving the forest strangely still. Rachel wandered a short distance from the cabin, her footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. She could hear the distant rustle of animals in the underbrush, but something else caught her attention, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like voices. She froze, straining her ears. There it was again. Faint, disembodied voices drifting through the trees. Her heart raced. She looked around, but the forest was empty, silent. Maybe it was just the wind, she told herself. But deep down, she knew better. The voices seemed to be coming from the direction of the rusted gate, the path to Dark Hollow. Rachel swallowed hard, her curiosity battling with her fear. She glanced back at the cabin, where her friends were fast asleep, oblivious to the strange sounds. For a moment, she considered waking them. But what would she say? That she was hearing things in the middle of the night? They'd laugh, tell her she was imagining it. No. She had to check this out on her own. Taking a deep breath, Rachel started toward the road, her heart pounding with every step. The voices grew louder as she neared the fork, though she still couldn't make out what they were saying. It was like a chorus of whispers, overlapping, disjointed, and pleading. When she reached the gate, she hesitated. The sign still hung there, swaying gently in the breeze, Dark Hollow, private property. A warning, or a challenge? Before she could second-guess herself, Rachel pushed open the gate. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty woods. The path beyond was overgrown, the dirt road barely visible beneath a blanket of leaves and brambles. The air grew colder as she ventured deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The voices had stopped, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed down on her like a weight. After what felt like an eternity, Rachel reached the edge of the town. Dark Hollow lay before her, bathed in the eerie light of the moon. It was like stepping back in time, the buildings were old, crumbling, as if they had been abandoned for decades. Yet, there was something unnatural about the place. It was too still, too quiet. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she stepped into the town square. The air was thick with the stench of decay. The windows of the buildings were dark, shattered, yet she could feel eyes watching her from every corner. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the empty streets. There was no sign of life, no birds, no insects, not even the wind dared to disturb this place. And then, she saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the square, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, cloaked in black, its face obscured by darkness. Rachel's blood turned to ice as the figure began to move toward her, slowly, deliberately. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet were frozen to the ground. The figure drew closer, its footsteps silent, its presence suffocating. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in her ears. They weren't just voices, they were screams. Agonized, desperate screams. Rachel's paralysis broke, and she stumbled backward, her heart racing in terror. She had to get out of here. She turned and ran, sprinting back the way she came, the screams chasing her through the forest. But as she reached the edge of town, something stopped her dead in her tracks. Standing in front of her, blocking the path, was another figure. This one was smaller, hunched over, its face twisted in a grotesque mask of pain. It reached out a hand to her, its skin pale and withered, its fingers long and bony. Rachel backed away, her mind spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But the pain in her chest was real, the cold sweat on her skin was real, and the terror gripping her heart was all too real. The figure took a step toward her, and Rachel bolted in the opposite direction, darting between the crumbling buildings. She had no idea where she was going, she just needed to escape. But the town was a maze, and no matter how far she ran, the figures kept appearing. Each one more twisted and monstrous than the last. Their screams filled the air, drowning out her thoughts, driving her to the brink of madness. Finally, Rachel stumbled into an alley, her chest heaving, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She collapsed against the wall, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The figures were closing in, their whispers filling her mind like a swarm of locusts. This was it. She was going to die here. But just as the darkness began to consume her, a familiar voice pierced through the cacophony. Rachel. She jerked her head up, her heart leaping in her chest. Jenna stood at the entrance to the alley, her face pale with fear. Behind her were Eric and Tom, their expressions mirroring her own. Without a word, they pulled Rachel to her feet and dragged her out of the alley, away from the figures, away from Dark Hollow. They ran through the forest, the screams fading behind them, until they finally reached the cabin. Only then did they stop, collapsing onto the porch in a heap of exhaustion. Rachel was shaking uncontrollably, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. What the hell was that? Jenna gasped, her voice trembling. I don't know, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. But we need to leave. Now. Without wasting another second, they packed their things and piled into the car. As they drove away, Rachel glanced back at the forest, her heart still racing. Dark Hollow was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. But the memory of that place, and the horrors it held, would haunt her forever. The group never spoke of that night again. They never told anyone what they had seen, what they had heard. It was as if the town had cursed them, leaving them with a secret they could never share. And though they never returned to Pinewood Forest, Rachel knew one thing for certain. Dark Hollow was still out there, waiting, watching, for the next soul foolish enough to stumble upon its forgotten streets. And it would never forget.